Explore the dramatic confrontation where Elijah demonstrated God's supremacy by calling fire from heaven to defeat Baal worship. The contest on Mount Carmel, a showdown of gods. The land of Israel lay in desolation. For 3 long years, not a single drop of rain had fallen. The once lush fields were now cracked and barren. Streams and rivers had dried to dusty beds, and the famine that followed left people weak and desperate. This drought was no ordinary calamity, it was the word of the Lord fulfilled. Through the prophet Elijah, God had declared that the skies would be shut, and no rain would come until Elijah spoke the word. The drought was not merely a punishment, but a direct challenge to the worship of Baal, the Canaanite god of rain and fertility. Despite being God's chosen people, the Israelites had turned their backs on Yahweh. Under the influence of King Ahab and his queen Jezebel, Baal worship had flourished. Jezebel, fiercely devoted to Baal, had imported hundreds of his priests and established altars to Baal throughout the land. She even ordered the slaughter of the prophets of Yahweh, silencing many who might have called the people back to God. But one man stood resolute, Elijah, the prophet of the Lord. At God's command, Elijah went to confront Ahab. Their meeting was tense. As soon as the king saw him, Ahab sneered, "Is that you troubler of Israel?" "I have not made trouble for Israel," Elijah replied, his voice steady. "But you and your father's family have. You have abandoned the Lord's commands and followed the Baals. Now summon the people from all over Israel to meet me on Mount Carmel. And bring the 450 prophets of Baal and the 400 prophets of Asherah who eat at Jezebel's table." Ahab, perhaps curious or desperate to end the drought, agreed. Messengers were sent out, and soon the people, the priests of Baal, and even the royal entourage gathered on the slopes of Mount Carmel. Elijah stood before the assembly, his figure alone but unshaken. He looked out over the crowd and raised his voice. "How long will you waver between 2 opinions? If the Lord is God, follow him. But if Baal is God, follow him." The people murmured among themselves but said nothing. Their silence revealed their hesitation, their divided hearts. They wanted the blessings of Yahweh but feared abandoning the seductive rituals of Baal. Elijah continued, proposing a test that would leave no doubt about who the true God was. "I am the only one of the Lord's prophets left, but Baal has 450 prophets. Let us each prepare a sacrifice. Let Baal's prophets take a bull, cut it into pieces, and lay it on the wood but not set fire to it. I will do the same with another bull. Then you will call on the name of your God, and I will call on the name of the Lord. The God who answers by fire, he is God." The people, intrigued, agreed. "What you say is good," they responded. The prophets of Baal went first. They selected their bull, prepared it, and laid it on their altar. Then they began to call on Baal. "Baal, answer us!" they shouted. Their voices rose in unison, echoing across the mountains. They danced and leaped around the altar, crying out in desperation. Hours passed. The morning stretched toward noon, but there was no response. The air remained still, the altar untouched. Elijah could not resist mocking them. He called out, "Shout louder! Surely he is a god. Perhaps he is deep in thought or busy or traveling. Maybe he is sleeping and must be awakened." His words stung, and the prophets of Baal grew more frantic. They shouted louder, cutting themselves with swords and spears until their blood flowed. They believed their self-inflicted wounds would show their devotion and compel Baal to respond. But the afternoon passed and nothing happened. The altar remained silent, lifeless. There was no voice, no fire, no answer. As the sun began to sink, Elijah stepped forward. He gestured for the people to gather close, and they did, curious and expectant. Calmly, Elijah began to repair the altar of the Lord that had been torn down. He took 12 stones, representing the 12 tribes of Israel, and built the altar in the name of the Lord. Then he dug a trench around the altar, large enough to hold several gallons of water. Elijah arranged the wood on the altar, cut the bull into pieces, and laid it on top. Then he did something extraordinary. "Fill 4 large jars with water and pour it on the offering and the wood," he commanded. The people obeyed, dousing the altar with water. The wood, the bull, and even the stones were soaked. "Do it again," Elijah said. They poured water a second time. "Do it a third time," he instructed. And they did so until the trench around the altar was filled with water. The crowd was astonished. How could fire ignite such a drenched sacrifice? At the time of the evening sacrifice, Elijah stepped forward and prayed. His voice was steady but filled with earnestness. "Lord, the God of Abraham, Isaac, and Israel, let it be known today that you are God in Israel, and that I am your servant, and have done all these things at your command. Answer me, Lord, answer me, so these people will know that you, Lord, are God, and that you are turning their hearts back again." As the final words of his prayer faded into the air, fire fell from heaven. It was no ordinary flame. It blazed with a holy intensity, consuming the bull, the wood, the stones, and even the water in the trench. The crowd shielded their faces from the radiant heat and brilliance of the fire. As the final words of his prayer faded into the air, fire fell from heaven. It was no ordinary flame. It blazed with a holy intensity, consuming the bull, the wood, the stones, and even the water in the trench. The crowd shielded their faces from the radiant heat and brilliance of the fire. When the flames subsided, silence fell over the mountain. Then, as if compelled by an unseen force, the people fell to their knees, their faces to the ground. They cried out, "The Lord, He is God! The Lord, He is God!" Fine. Elijah seized the moment. He commanded the people to capture the prophets of Baal.
"Don't let anyone get away,"
he ordered. The people obeyed, seizing the false prophets and taking them down to the Kishon Valley, where they were executed. The dramatic contest on Mount Carmel was more than a miraculous display of God's power. It was a turning point for the nation of Israel. The fire from heaven proved that Yahweh alone was God, exposing the futility of Baal worship. Elijah's faith and courage shone as an example to the people. Standing alone against hundreds of Baal's prophets and a wavering nation, he had trusted in the Lord's power. His boldness not only vindicated God's name, but also began to turn the hearts of the people back to their Creator. As the crowd dispersed, the drought that had plagued the land was about to come to an end. Elijah climbed to the top of Mount Carmel and prayed for rain. Soon, the sky, which had been cloudless for years, darkened with storm clouds, and rain poured down upon the land, restoring life to the parched earth. The story of Elijah and the prophets of Baal reminds us of God's unmatched power and his desire for wholehearted devotion. It challenges us to forsake all other allegiances and declare with conviction, "The Lord, He is God." Let this awe-inspiring miracle remind you of the undeniable strength of faith.